Hello, I'm David R. Lewis. Welcome to Theater of the Mind. While I write novels in several genres, closest to my heart is a series of true short stories gathered from my childhood and youth I call Heartland Memories. This particular memory takes us back a few decades to a road trip adventure when my wife, the coveted Lara, and I were young. I hope you enjoy it. In the early spring of 1975, I quit my job at the cop shop, and my wife and I filled a Volkswagen thing with camping gear and took to the road, no destination in mind. A few days later, we found ourselves in Brown County, Indiana. It was a truly lovely area with rolling hills, scenic valleys, quaint artist communities, and more covered bridges per square whatever than any place else on the globe, I think. We decided to stay for a few days and pitched our tent in a rambling campground between two wooded hills in one of those scenic valleys 50 feet from the obligatory babbling brook. Lara had never been camping, but took to it readily, and all was soon right with the world. Supper was on the fire, extra wood stacked nearby. Foraging for deadwood was still okay in national forests in those days. And the coffee pot was bubbling quietly at the edge of the small blaze. A whippoorwill called in the distance, the echo rebounding through the valley as the sun settled in behind the tall hill across the flat. The campfire rattled sparks skyward from time to time, and we watched darkness seep up through depressions in the valley floor, lurk behind the trees and brush, and creep slowly toward the lantern light, bringing the chill of night to our insides and outside. We human types are born fire watchers. It comes naturally from our genes, DNA, or whatever. It's a cellular memory, something that began with our ancestors as far back as our ancestors had fire. An awareness that transcends who we are and lives in the bedrock of what we are, fertilized by where we came from. It is the fear of darkness that gave birth to the fellowship of fire. All of us have it. It's buried more deeply in some than in others, but it is there in each of us, that need to believe that the circle of firelight keeps whatever is out there in the dark at bay. Sleeping in a rolled-up wool blanket by a riverbank campfire was a natural thing to me. For Lara, I'd procured a tent, sleeping bags, air mattresses, and many other examples of what was modern camping of the time. We drank coffee, heard the brook get louder as the sky grew darker, smelled the acrid scent of red oak on the burn, and listened to a screech owl produce 50 pounds of loud from a 5-ounce body. The stars were out in force, and our breath left white plumes in the still air. As the fire died down, so did we, and turned in for the night. The temperature dropped to below freezing, and we were miserable. I watched my dear wife shiver in her sleep and finally dropped off myself, shaking with the cold. As usual, when camping, I awoke at first light and lay in the bag for a time, screwing up the courage to drag myself out into the chill. I wanted coffee, biscuits, and bacon ready for Lara when she rose. So I eased quietly from the bag and out of the tent. It was as if I had crawled into a ping-pong ball. I could see absolutely nothing. When I stood up, I realized the entire campground was covered by an intense ground fog. It was pure white, came to about the middle of my chest, and was so dense I could barely see my feet. The fog stretched away down the valley, as if the earth were covered by a blanket of the palest cotton candy. It was beautiful, and it made the landscape eerily quiet. As I gazed out across it, the head of a deer materialized upward through the fog about 10 yards away. A buck, an 8-pointer, turned his head and looked directly at me. I froze, and soon he disappeared downward to be replaced by a doe slightly farther away, then one closer, then two. For several minutes, this Bambi bobbing continued with the buck and 4 or 5 does, none farther away from me than 50 feet. I longed to tell Lara, but I could not. If I moved, the spell would be broken and they would be gone. On it went, until I heard her stir, At that point, I clapped my hands and the deer took off, soaring up from the fog in graceful, arcing leaps, to vanish once again, trailing wisps of white to mark the trajectory of their flight. Again and again they appeared moving across the valley, only to plunge back below the surface, the fog clinging to them as water to a pod of dolphins. It remains one of the most exquisite visions of my life. After they left, I realized tears were on my face. Gone was the cold, the want of coffee, even the need for breath. I was completely caught up in one perfect moment, suspended in time, as clear to me now as it was in that little camp all those decades ago. An exquisite experience for me that for the deer was nothing more than just another morning by a babbling brook in Brown County, Indiana. At least, that's how it seems to me. I'm David R. Lewis. Thanks for visiting Theater of the Mind.